how to do that. So we have a new paradigm. It's happening. Green New Deal is a new approach example. Cap and trade is an example of an old approach based on permits that is coming up to try to solve climate change, but scares EJ communities. We can go into this, but it's just a breath of fresh air. You know, since the late 80s, early 90s, I wrote the first law review article on environmental justice. It's been a battle everywhere, teaching it, legislating it, litigating it, and going to be in all these advisory committees. And all of a sudden, boom, 2020, we're there again. So the example I'm going to give you, speaking for myself and not EJTF, is the cap and trade. So basically we have air permits, and you get permits to emit, say, greenhouse gases. And you can trade or buy off that permit by getting an offset, but not there. This will lock in emissions to EJ communities. There is no way, once you've got your plant set up and you're emitting and your permits are all in order and the transactional cost of moving your plant, you're not going to do it. You know, you can, so this sounds preposterous, but this is what you've inherited. Guess what? Based on that permit system, where there's not very much enforcement, where there's high thresholds, where it's self-reported, where cross-media shadow emissions aren't even counted. It's based on that. Its premise is the old premise that got us to where we are as we sit here right now. So there's a lot that's going to happen eventually, probably here. So I'm trying to reduce your epistemological uncertainty. You don't even know the questions to ask. You know there's something not right in climate change. What do you do? And you're getting educated here. You're not paid, but you're paying to be smart. You know, so you have to have what questions do I need to ask about things? And I'll give you some questions. But my goal is to reduce your epistemological uncertainty in a way that helps you make climate justice policy that includes ecological reparations. Here's a practical approach: place-based studies. I love this. And it was in the National Environmental Justice Advisory Committee at the EPA. I was on the Waste Subcommittee. And the idea was, well, we're trying to look at unintended urban environmental impacts in downtown Portland from DC. And, you know, we try to take a case study from San Diego, and case studies are cheap. You're learning by case studies. Law school, architecture, medicine, business, all case studies. Why do you do case studies? You look at a case, say it's a law, you look at the case, you see the general characteristics of it, and then you think you can apply it all over the place, regardless of the ecology, regardless of it. And your education has some holes in terms of professional training based on case studies. You'll miss some things. You'll get clients that never were a case study. So having a place-based approach, place studies instead of case studies. We're in a place. You all have a culture here. You all have this physical space. If we wanted to make this a sustainable room, would we be looking to sustainable practices in New York City? Maybe. Where we have to do it right here, right now. Now, my suggestion, I'm not even considering the money or the cost or anything like that. I'm considering what we need to do in terms of the environment. So, community, landscape, nature, the past, culture, conservation. Here are some questions. You know, you're wondering, geez, this guy was talking and says we're supposed to have questions. What kind of questions are we supposed to have? Here are some about it. And you know what? You have to do this with sacrifice zone communities. Not just people that are clamoring to talk to you. You have to reach out and be so inclusive and slow compared to the normal pace of environmental decision making. We're doing this in Oregon. Oh, Shimon. She's waiting. Okay, quickly. We're doing this in Oregon, place-based studies, got the link. Human right to water, that's coming up in California. It's because of EJ suppression, water, deprivation of Latino and indigenous communities, and now that is not from my boomer generation. This is new. This is you. Place studies, human rights. This is Bob's world. In terms of land use law, I've written about this. It's not that hard. We have historic preservation districts. Just make them ecological preservation districts. We have the legal power. We have the legal mechanism. We could do it. Summary, externalities not included by business. Government does not adequately control them. It's set 1970 since we had regulation. Probably 200 years before that with nothing. Since 70s, it's not that great. You don't really get that here in Oregon or in Portland. There's no big military bases. You go east of the Mississippi, it's all over. Injustice, sacrifice zones, climate changers, and future leadership focus on this and reparations. I told you a little bit about what would be part of that. Catch my breath here. The conclusions are that social justice efforts, feeling bad, adopt a community, we're so sorry, it's our charitable intent to help you. Charity is no substitute for justice denied, all right? It's well-intended. I want to be charitable, I'm mad you're not accepting my charity. No substitute for justice denied. And that's what your cohort is facing, that my cohort didn't have to. Reparations to ecosystems and communities provides transformative. That's a paradigm shift. That's a different way of thinking. They weren't even including cities in air emissions issues until Carol Browner, a visionary, took over the EPA in the mid-90s. And I got the sign a few minutes ago. This is one of my favorite authors. We're also married. But I'm gonna, end with that. I don't ever have a choice, do I? I do, and I just love this author. And so it's been a lot to cover, and this should be a course, but I hope I've stimulated your interest on this to think broadly and out of the box. Another way to find the sacrifice zones, and this is a question I get from students a lot, is just to look at housing, education, employment, transportation, and public accommodations. These are all areas that race determined who got what. Race determined where you live. Race determined where you live determines where you go to school. And where you go to school determines what kind of jobs you get. So that's really concentrated. And now you're smart. You have EJ Screen, you have ToxDocs. Check that out. That's free, it's a link, and it has all the original legal documents from expert public health individuals in EJ cases that were supposed to be kept secret. When you settle a case, you do it on 2 terms, that you're not guilty and the settlement amount remains undisclosed, right? And that's how all these legal cases have been settled on it. ToxDocs, that doesn't apply to the expert witnesses. I'm one of 2 federal court expert witnesses on EJ in the United States with the Spokane tribal litigation. So I don't have to keep secret. I can release all my documents. And these 3 gentlemen at Columbia University, boy, they might lose their jobs for this. They're doing that. So I wanted to, you have those 2 empowerment tools, EJ and ToxDocs, to figure out what's going on around you. It's going to be inclusionary, it's going to be expensive, and it's going to be Bob's talking right now because I think I should answer some questions.
Thank you so much, Bob. Like I announced in the beginning of class, the students had requested about 2 minutes to gather their thoughts, to write down their questions and fill out those papers. So please take this time to fill out your papers and pass them to the middle of the row. I'll pick them up and ask questions from those questions. I wanted to put you on the spot also, Miles, and say if you wanted to tell us anything else about the Environmental Justice Task Force, who else is on the task force, what you guys do?
Hi, my name is Miles Palacios. I work in the governor's office and support the Environmental Justice Task Force, so I work with them pretty closely. There are members of that task force that are predominantly involved in communities all over the state. So we have folks that are out in the Grand, folks that are down in the Eugene area. These are people that are really invested in the community and invested in the environmental justice conversation in Oregon. A lot of the work that they do is provide recommendations to the legislature, but also to the governor on addressing climate change. And the climate bill that's currently LC 19, if you want to look on the Oregon Legislative Information System, that is the governor's priority this next legislative session, and it's going to be pretty interesting, to say the least. So there's a lot of work going on that right now, and the Environmental Justice Task Force is a great resource because they are the folks that are like civic duty, like champ. Like the number one thing that I can probably say to y'all as students currently is use your voice. A lot of the times the people that are in the room that are being heard around these environmental conversations are the folks that are being supported by people who have the money to be in the room. Those rooms are accessible to everyday folks as well, but a lot of times they don't have someone who's a paid lobbyist to support them in that conversation. And this is not from the governor's office, this is from my own personal opinion. So yeah, get out there, use your voice, be a part of the conversation. The EPA's EJ screen is an amazing tool. It definitely shows these frontline communities, and it really does show that Indigenous folks that are coming from these areas that just don't have the support, that's the type of support that we need in these areas.
How can you tell an EJ person in a room? We're the only one not being paid. For real.
Okay, thank you. I'll give you just a few more minutes for anyone else who is finishing up, and we'll do Q&A, and then Rogue afterward.
I might point out with, I might try to point out with EJTF, we're all volunteer. We're not paid agency people. And when we first started, people had to come down up from Klamath Falls in Eastern Oregon all the way to Salem, K Falls, Klamath Falls tribe, and they did it. We had perfect attendance our first 4 years. And it was amazing because all the other state legislative type agencies, they have staffs and HR. It's just us, we're mean and lean. And you know what an agenda is in DJ land? An agenda is one person's opinion about what they should talk about, right? For real. So you come up to a agenda as an EJ person and it's Title V, clean air permits, indirect emissions costs, blah, blah, blah. Well, EJ cuts to the chase on that. That conversation, by the way, I've been dismissive of it, and I don't want to be too dismissive. You're the intellectual bank we have for climate change policy. So that type of discussion, you will be self-empowered to know, but not repeat. So.
Great, so it looks like everyone has turned in their questions except for maybe two folks. So we'll go on with the Q&A. Next time I promise I'll give you some silence if you need it. But now maybe you guys have gotten the So do you sense an overall positive trend in environmental justice progress in the United States with regards to researching the subject?
Yes, I do, but not at universities. The tension between town and gown, between community and university, is a big one. There's a long history called community university partnership grants, for example, CUP grants, and certain universities would take the money from that and then just disregard our communities. This happened in Detroit. This community just wanted 5 GEDs out of the deal. That's all they wanted. They didn't have to provide childcare. With EJ meetings, you have to provide childcare. Really, you need to. It's been a weird fight. So I perceive it very positively because I'm sitting here now telling you about environmental reparations instead of putting words on paper. I also think that knowledge is empowering. So is it getting better? Yes, because we have the knowledge. But you're going to be frustrated and probably a little angry because like a lot of EJ communities are, we found out miscarriage rates due to this power plant. We know the information and nothing happens. And nothing. So yes and no. I think that's a wonderful thing. I think if you look at some of the links, you can begin to answer questions for yourself. But I think that there's going to be some rough politics and some not incremental changes, which I think is a good thing, but people that like a stable economy and a stable way of doing things are going to be uncomfortable with. Let me just add to that point. One thing EJ communities want is to be the leaders of climate change. How can you do climate policy and not take the most toxic areas? How can you do that? I'll tell you why. Racism. And you know why I think that? This is another example. We look at Katrina in New Orleans. We look at Houston, a black city, if there ever is one, Latino people call it there. We look at Puerto Rico. We look at the farm workers of Central Valley, California. They hit the first wave of climate changes, hurricanes, tornadoes, fires. They're the first wave impacts, front line. They got killed, nothing. It looks right now like our climate change policy is not picking up on the knowledge and impacts and existences in these places. But like I said, cross-media is a fancy word for everything that goes around comes around. And so all the toxic, so you're coming in gentrification, you move it by a townhouse in a poor neighborhood, and you displace that. Well, guess what? Your kids are going to have the same lead in their school water as the black kids have in their school water in Portland right now. So more knowledge on that issue, but I wanted to stress the point that it's been an active discussion. Having an equal share of the discussion from the EJ community is what we think is very progressive. They want more. They want to be a driver for climate change policy. And ever since Hurricane Sandy hit those blue-collar communities, you should see what washed up out of those stored warehouse buildings. There's a lot of history with manufacturing permits. They put them off to the coast so they don't require to get permits, and then there's a hurricane. We're all in that. We're all in that together.
Thank you. I'll read this as it's written. But if the person who wrote it wants to ask personally, they can. How can I navigate this if I'm both of colonizer blood and indigenous descent? I'm torn of both worlds, but not fully of either.
Well, we're all sort of mixed and sharply, you know, and so that is a very serious dilemma. I hang out at Grand Ron. One of the only writers I let touch or participate in anything I write is Brett Merrill, who was the editor for Smoke Signals, a brilliant writer, and I'm familiar with that angst. Now, getting indigenous nations involved in EJ at the grassroots level is like getting France to come for downtown protests in Portland, because they are sovereign nations. So part of being a colonizer is that just is it. That's what you are. But define yourself more by environmental terms, not by what others label you at. The anger against 1700s colonizers and 1800s industry is okay. It's not, anger is not useful. You will be very angry, but it's not useful. You'll be very frustrated at that. The answer I give to, not all indigenous people are the same, but to the indigenous people I've had and worked with on this, is look up EJ Screen, look up ToxDocs, empower yourself with environmental information, if for no other reason as to protect your own epigenetics, okay, your own epigenetics. So if this person wants to have children but grew up in a lead toxic waste site, what could happen? So just for your own self-interest, arm yourself with the knowledge of your environmental exposures so that you can be healthy. A very famous biblical scholar, Marshawn Lynch, was talking about you gotta mind your chickens and you gotta mind your financial, and you gotta mind your mentals, is what he called it, using the dialect of English spoken Oakland. And so he's a fullback for the Seattle Seahawks. So in that type of direct advice to a person of color, I use advice from a man of color to a person of color in that regard. Not for me necessarily, just how I dealt with it, but what he would say.
This is an additional question, because we're talking a lot about definitions, and I mentioned that probably every single speaker who comes here will have a different definition of environmental justice and water justice. The question is, why do you call them EJ communities rather than communities needing EJ?
That's a very, very, very good question on that. And the EJ communities are ways we can measure disproportionality, but we want numbers. So we want to know if it's a, quote, minority community. I might point out, white is minority in the world, okay? The world is made of people of color. And so the definitions that I stick to are easy and direct and straightforward. Unequal benefits and burdens. We can measure that, we can start with that, we can add time with that with the history. So the ability to move in a way that studies the accumulated impacts is a way to move forward with EJ. One of the things that I didn't mention that all the presidential Democratic candidates want is research for climate change impacts on vulnerable communities. So the term EJ community, okay, Bob, draw us a map, where is that? And you can do statistics, summary tape files, A through F of the census, STF files. You're in school, you can figure that stuff out. But what was there a second part to that? I'm not sure.
Why EJ communities rather than communities needing EJ?
That's a very good question. And the term that I'm sticking to is EJ with benefits and burdens, and they need environmental justice. And so that was a big term, race, equity, environmental justice. And so the communities needing EJ are also EJ communities. It gets a bit tautological, we can go that way, but they ask, how do you measure an EJ community? And we can look at EJ screen, and they tell you right there where the EJ communities are, right on EJ screen. So we can see that. The other words that are being thrown around that you need to be aware of because they have different meanings are frontline communities. Frontline communities for climate change. That's a bit different, but that's what they're using with that. So some other terms for EJ communities are issues of vulnerability. A very quick answer to that is our risk assessment is based upon a healthy 160-pound white male, the healthiest part of our society. The healthiest part of our society, and if it's okay for me, it's okay for a 14-year-old pregnant woman single, right? No, it's not. So that's one of the leaks that you've inherited. So vulnerability, frontline communities, EJ communities by socioeconomic SES data, socioeconomic status data. But is there environmental injustice everywhere? Depends how deep you look, how far back you look, and what the land, air, and water would say about that place. I might point out, EJ definitions, I should say this, it's a big deal because you'll include them and they won't show up, you won't know why. It's meaningful inclusion in the participation, in the participatory process. That's what it means. Now, you live in Oregon and we started EJ 10 years, EJTF. Our state agencies are answer to us in terms of EJ. And they're nice and they're bureaucratic and they're, well, this is some race thing, isn't it? And yeah, it is. And so what they've done is they've listened to us. They are required to file a report every year, the natural resource agencies, on what they've done for EJ, and their executive director is supposed to sign it, and it goes to the governor. We're the only state that does that. Other state agencies are looking to Oregon for that. I'm very proud that EJTF was the driving force on that. And so you can look up and see where your tax dollars go in terms of environmental justice in your state environmental regulatory agencies.
Thank you so much. Like I said, thank you everyone. We do have a table reserved at Rogue. This talk has brought up a lot of different issues and questions that you'll want to